Okay, we will go ahead and get started here. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to the Berkeley Life Professional Nitric Oxide Q&A. I am Sarah Moser. I'm the Practitioner Account Support Manager for Berkeley Life, and I'm the person that has been most likely corresponding with you and emailing you leading up to this webinar. So I will be your direct point of contact moving forward. Let me clear that out. If you need anything, have any questions, I'll also be the person following up with you after the webinar to address anything that comes up for you. So basically, we've had a variety of questions come in from practitioners over the past few months and thought this would be a great platform to address some of the questions and kind of get them all in one place. There's also a chat box down on the bottom, so if any questions come up during the presentation, feel free to type those out in the chat box and then we will do our best to answer them at the end. So again, we've compiled previous questions that have come in and were submitted from practitioners, and Beth will be going through those in the presentation tonight. So our presenter tonight is Beth Shirley. She is the head of our Berkeley Life Scientific Advisory Board, and she's going to start out giving an overview of nitric oxide. Beth has a really broad background. She supports Berkeley Life in a clinical scientific perspective, so I maybe have handed you over to her if you have any high-level clinical questions. And she has over a 40-year career as a pharmacist and a certified nutritionist. She has a broad range of experience in bioidentical hormone balancing, dietary supplement integration, drug nutrient depletion programs, intestinal dysfunction, autoimmune, chronic inflammatory issues. So as you can see, it's a wide variety of specialties and topics. She currently provides clinical nutrition services for wellness-focused individuals and for a wide spectrum of patients. And she's been working with some of the top leaders in nitric oxide for the past 10 years, and so is obviously an expert in the field of nitric oxide. And you can imagine that she's developed an in-depth knowledge on the topic and its applications in a clinical setting. So Beth, if you're there and you can hear me, I will go ahead and hand it over to you.
Good evening, everybody. So let's talk about nitric oxide, the miracle molecule. Nitric oxide affects virtually every single physiological function in our body. It governs the circulation and microcirculation, which is essential in order to keep the cells and the tissues fed with glucose, nutrients, oxygen, and clean away the debris. There's two main ways we make nitric oxide. The first pathway is the arginine nitric oxide pathway. The arginine goes through the NOS, the nitric oxide synthase enzymes, to produce nitric oxide in citrulline. The nitrate to nitrite to nitric oxide pathway, we consume the nitrates, they're absorbed, and about 25% of them get concentrated in the salivary glands. Salivary glands release the nitrates. We've got good anaerobic bacteria on the dorsal aspect of our tongue that will reduce the nitrates to nitrite. Some of the nitrite is further reduced to nitric oxide in the stomach. Most of the nitrites get absorbed, travels around to different places in our body, and we have different nitrite reductases that will further reduce the nitrite to nitric oxide on an as-needed basis. Like even our muscles have, the myoglobin has a nitrite reductase to increase the nitric oxide when you're exercising. Next slide. So what are the factors affecting nitric oxide formation? Aging. As we get older, our ability to make nitric oxide through the NOS pathway decreases. Our diets, the standard American diet, which is devoid of these nitrate-rich veggies. Exercise. Exercise will increase your nitric oxide production. So when we don't exercise, when we're couch potatoes, our nitric oxide production tanks. Medications. There's a bunch of medications that directly affect our nitric oxide production. NSAIDs like Motrin, Aleve, these NSAIDs decrease nitric oxide synthesis, which is the reason why they're connected with cardiovascular disease and kidney dysfunction. Oral contraceptives decrease our nitric oxide production. Antibiotics, the SSRI antidepressants, antibacterial mouthwash, and PPIs like the Nexium and Prilosec. These will decrease our nitric oxide production through both pathways. Pollution. Pollution increases oxidative stress, which then decreases our production of nitric oxide. Genetics. Not only just our NOS SNPs, NOS SNPs, our SOD, our superoxide dismutase SNPs, anything that is connected with our BH4 production, like even the MTHFR SNPs, influence negatively our ability to make nitric oxide. And the big one, stress. Stress decreases our ability to make nitric oxide. Next one. So as we get older, our capacity to make the nitric oxide decreases. By the time we're 50, our NOS enzymes are only functioning about 50%. By the time we're 60, it's only functioning around 15%. And as you can see, as women, we're more protected with nitric oxide until we hit the menopause years, because estrogen will increase our production of nitric oxide through our NOS enzymes. Next slide. So this is the progression of endothelial dysfunction, and it shows that in our 20s, our endothelium is healthy, and as we get older, it decreases in its ability to make nitric oxide. Next slide. So what are some of the applications for nitric oxide? Well, the number one is cardiovascular function. Cardiovascular disease is still the number one killer in the United States. 1 out of 4 deaths are from cardiovascular disease. So it's been shown through studies by decreasing the blood pressure by just 5 millimeters of mercury, decreases the risk of stroke by 34%. Our recent study shows that the Berkeley Life will decrease the systolic blood pressure by 12.5 millimeters of mercury and the diastolic by 4.7 millimeters of mercury. So keeping that cardiovascular system, the circulation and the microcirculation healthy, keeps all of your organs and tissues healthy. Sexual dysfunction. So erectile dysfunction equals endothelial dysfunction. And often erectile dysfunction is the first sign of cardiovascular disease. So I know the PDE5 inhibitors like Viagra, Cialis are used frequently for ED. However, these drugs cannot work without adequate nitric oxide. So that's why these drugs only work in about 50% of the people that take it. And as females, we need optimal nitric oxide in order to be able to respond, to feel. And lubrication is nitric oxide mediated. So as women, if we are unable to feel and we're not lubricating, do you think we really think about sex that much? Probably not. Cognitive function and neurogenesis. By optimizing the circulation and microcirculation, this allows our cells in the brain to get the nutrients, get the glucose, get the oxygen, and clean away the debris. BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is intimately involved with nitric oxide. And deficiency of BDNF can lead to anxiety and depression. Nitric oxide is involved in neuroplasticity. It's involved in long-term memory. And they've shown that nitrates will actually help increase the production of BH4, the enzyme that is needed for us to make our serotonin, our dopamine, our norepinephrine, epinephrine, all of these neurotransmitters. And soon I will have a new paper out, Nitric Oxide in Mental Health. So just get a hold of us and we'll send it out to you. Exercise performance and recovery. By optimizing the nitric oxide, it will increase exercise endurance and decrease the recovery time. Gastric function. Nitric oxide governs the mucosal blood flow and the mucus thickness. So studies have shown that nitrates will prevent the loss of tight junctions and prevents leaky guts that are induced by antibiotic therapy. So I highly recommend using nitrate therapy, using the Berkeley Life in anybody that is on any kind of antibiotics, even prescription or herbal. Diabetes and neuropathy. Diabetics have even a lower nitric oxide than normal. The high blood glucose increases the NOS uncoupling, the NOS dysfunction, which increases oxidative stress. Nitric oxide is bound tightly with hemoglobin A1C. So the higher the hemoglobin A1C, the less nitric oxide you will have being bioavailable. The GLUT4 receptor on the cell requires adequate nitric oxide in order to bring the glucose into the cell. And most complications for diabetics are cardiovascular complications. This is what people die from. So optimizing the nitric oxide is essential. Stem cell treatments. The stem cells require adequate nitric oxide in order to mobilize and differentiate, which means the nitric oxide helps tell them where to go and what to do. Hyperbarics increase the production of stem cells. So you want to optimize your nitric oxide in both of these cases. And in fact, fasting, one of the benefits of fasting is to increase stem cell production. So make sure your nitric oxide is optimized to get the most benefits you can out of that. Next slide. So does Berkeley Life increase peroxynitrite? No. and you should not be worried. So peroxynitrite is when nitric oxide complexes with superoxide. So if you are having lots of superoxide being formed, typically this means you aren't making a lot of nitric oxide because superoxide shuts down nitric oxide production. Next slide. So we've got three main ways our body makes a superoxide. The first pathway, uncoupled dysfunctional NOS, nitric oxide synthase. So when NOS is uncoupled, it becomes an enzyme that only makes superoxide, not nitric oxide. So when you're making this superoxide, you're not producing the peroxynitrite because you're not making the nitric oxide. And through one of my papers that I talk about how nitrate supplementation recouples NOS. So when you recouple NOS, you're making nitric oxide, not superoxide. So you're decreasing the amount of peroxynitrite being made. The NADPH oxidase, the NOx enzyme, its only job is to make superoxide. And all of these environmental factors, molds, chemicals, heavy metals, stress, all of these things increase NOx's production of superoxide. But nitrites and nitric oxide inhibit NOx's production of superoxide. So if you're inhibiting superoxide production and increasing nitric oxide production, you're decreasing peroxynitrite production. And then we've got the uncoupled mitochondrial electron transport chain. Nitric oxide and nitrite recouple the electron transport chain and prevents electron leakage and superoxide production. So restoring nitric oxide production decreases superoxide production, which will decrease peroxynitrite production, decreasing oxidative stress. And ONO, ONOO, which is a peroxynitrite molecule, can isomerize, can change its configuration into NO3, which is nitrate, which is inert. So there's a new paradigm that's emerging from some of the nitric oxide researchers saying that nitric oxide and its metabolites may be present in different diseases. However, it doesn't mean that it's causing the pathology. It may be the body's way of trying to take control of the situation, not necessarily the cause of damage. So think about it this way. When there is a crime scene, usually you've got the police involved. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the police are the cause of this, but they're always there. So this new paradigm is emerging, saying that peroxynitrite isn't necessarily the bad guy and the cause of damage. Next slide. This is a beautiful paper this year, the effects of nitrates on oxidative stress. So you eat the nitrates, consume the nitrates. It's reduced to nitrites. These nitrates decrease the reactive oxygen species, the oxidative stress, decreases the peroxynitrite production, increases the nitric oxide bioavailability and bioactivity. So this is an excellent study. Next slide. So how does dietary nitrate compared with using light therapy to increase nitric oxide? And are these therapies complementary? They are very complementary. Light therapy can increase nitric oxide through a couple different ways. And one way is by reducing the nitrite to nitric oxide. And so by having a good reservoir of your nitrates and nitrites, you will increase the therapeutic nitric oxide production of the light therapy. So I don't believe there's one reason to use one over the another. I think these both work together beautifully. Next slide. So what are some alternate pathways to improve nitric oxide? The good nitrate-rich veggies. There's the photobiomodulation. Nose breathing, like Wim Hof breathing, will increase your production of nitric oxide. Next slide. So the nitrate-rich foods, very high. Arugula, bok choy, spinach, butter lettuce, celery, beetroots. But the issue is that the same vegetable grown in different regions in the United States will have varying concentrations of nitrates in them. So spinach from one region will have a different concentration than spinach from around New York City, let's say. Next slide. So that's why I like giving a set milligrams of nitrates, like in the Berkeley Life, so you know exactly how much you're giving somebody. So I have not read Asa Hershoff's book. It's The Dangers of Celery. However, basically it's about celery juice, not celery. And when you're juicing any vegetables, if they aren't organic, and even some that are organic, have high concentration of pesticides and herbicides. The Environmental Working Group has celery included as one of the top 10 contaminated vegetables. So when you're juicing the celery, you're just concentrating all of these pesticides and herbicides and increasing the potential damage they can do. So eating your celery is not going to concentrate all of those toxic chemicals. Next slide. Can someone have too much nitric oxide? I don't believe so. So cardiovascular, #1 cause of death in the United States, nitric oxide deficiency. Diabetes, nitric oxide deficiency. So as I showed you at the beginning, how all of these factors go into our diminished ability to make nitric oxide, that we must feed this nitrate to nitrite to NO pathway to optimize our production of nitric oxide. Next slide. Are there any other questions?
I don't see any in the chat box, so I will go forward.
Okay.
If anyone has any, feel free to put them in the chat box and we will answer them.
I wanted to say maybe a couple things about our immune system. So nitric oxide is essential for us to be able to fight virus, bacteria, fungi. So this is another reason to optimize our nitric oxide. Because with this virus that's going around, the people that have the worst outcomes are the people with cardiovascular disease, with hypertension, with diabetes. All of these are nitric oxide deficient patients. So here's another reason to optimize your nitric oxide.
Thanks very much, Beth. Hi everyone, my name is John. I work with Beth and Sarah on the Berkeley Lifeline. So I wanted just to run through the two products that we offer in our nitric oxide support system. Again, some of you may be familiar, but no harm in doing a recap. It's actually very relevant given the emphasis Beth has placed there on the nitrate pathway, and specifically around ensuring you're getting an adequate dose of dietary nitrate. So as she mentioned, depending on the source of your leafy greens, it can really vary on how much nitrate you're getting and how much your nitric oxide is improving. So our product is designed essentially to mimic a leafy green diet, so the DASH or the Mediterranean diet. And the value in that is that we are able to deliver a consistent dosage of dietary nitrates each day for patients. So if you focus down here at the very bottom on the proprietary blend, that really is where the patient is getting the majority of the nitrates in the supplement. And if you think of it this way, that 2 of our capsules taken first thing in the morning is the equivalent of about 5 ounces of spinach or 7 ounces of beets in just a 2 capsule dose. So again, the majority of people aren't consuming those for breakfast or at any point in the day. So we're confident enough that will improve their nitric oxide levels. Again, depends on the patient, but we would say about 6 to 8 hours that will improve their nitric oxide for. And just to confirm, it's they're veg capsules, so hopefully no issues there. If you want to go on to the next slide, Sarah. So the test strips, and I know some of you maybe already be utilizing the test strips as in a trial basis, but first thing I want to touch on with them is obviously they're a measure of nitrite in saliva, which is indicative of nitric oxide in the body. But if you have someone that when you speak to them about nitric oxide and they're interested in improving their levels, these are a really good tool if they decide to go a dietary route. So it's quite difficult given the levels of the dosage of nitrates required. You need to be eating about 5 servings a day. But if they do choose that, the test strips allow them to confirm that the sources of their nitrates are giving them that efficacious dose. How we've been kind of working with some of our practitioners of late is utilizing them in the practice waiting room or in the treatment rooms. So, Sarah would be happy to send out kind of some sample test strips, and every patient that comes through just either having in the waiting room so they can let kind of curiosity take over and try out the test strips. And the majority of people will be deficient. It's just the nature of the standard American diet. And then that really just brings on the conversation around what they can do to improve that. So while we don't recommend only supplements, like obviously lunch and dinner, you can be including leafy greens. Berkeley Life is an ideal way to improve it. They're also a great tool for compliance. So when someone tests and assuming they're lower depleted, if they take 2 capsules of our product, or if they eat a big salad and test again about 90 minutes later, they'll see an improvement. So when we think of all the supplements that people are taking, there's very few that they can get that immediate feedback or immediate indication of effectiveness. So that's something we found to be really helpful for a patient complying, because they feel that there's something actually working and there's something that they can measure on an ongoing basis. Most patients, when they test once and see the improvement, don't necessarily need to test every time, potentially every time they come back to the practice. But the main reason we'd have people that would test on a regular basis would be maybe high performance athletes looking to improve it for endurance, as Beth touched on in her presentation, or as potentially people that are, again, trying the dietary approach. 2 things I like to remind people just around testing specifically is making sure that you haven't eaten or drank about 15 minutes before doing the test. That can affect the balance in the saliva and give you nearly always a false negative, so a kind of a lower depleted result, even though they might not have that. So just making sure there's no food, even water, will dilute the saliva, so that can be an issue. But again, we really encourage our practices to be creative with it and have a bit of fun. And once patients start to test, I think they'll get really hooked on the nitric oxide, and then once they improve their levels, they'll really start to notice the difference. So definitely feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to share a test strips with you so you can start testing in your practice today. Actually, one last point is that if you do treat patients remotely, we do also offer flyers that you can mail to your patients. These would be kind of high overviews of nitric oxide, and they have a nitric oxide test strip attached. So you can mail these to a patient, they can test in their home, and that kind of just prompts them to have the conversation with you about nitric oxide. Beth, anything you want to add about the test strips or the supplements?
I do. I consider this Berkeley Life Professional a base supplement. So you've got to open up the circulation and microcirculation for anything that you give somebody to get to where it needs to go. So by optimizing the nitric oxide, things are getting where they need to go. So I just use it as a base supplement. And then sometimes you might not need to give as much of other supplements to get the same response.
That's a great point. Okay, I think that's everything on the strips.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions from anyone. So again, my contact information is here. If there isn't anything else, feel free to reach out to me. I will make sure and follow up with everyone after the presentation and send you out a recording so that if you want to go back and let's take any notes or listen to it again, you can absolutely do that. And again, I will follow up just to touch base and see if you guys need any help or have any further questions. And thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
All right.
Bye.
Good night.